Well, we've heard from X and we've heard from Y, so I think it's time for Z. Please welcome Elaine Brower of Military Family Speak Out and the Bring the Guard Home Steering Committee. And don't worry about, there we go. Please put your hands together. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It's good to be here tonight. Thanks for having me. I wanted to sort of step back even further from where Phyllis and Jeff went. And I want to ask the question, what we're asking at this conference, who decides about war and peace? Is it the Congress? Is it the President? Is it the courts? Is it the people? What kind of national defense should the U.S. have, and what type of military? So we're talking about that at this conference. On this panel, we're addressing how peace activists can realistically develop a policy so that the U.S. only fights necessary wars. I would like to answer this question by first asking another question. How can peace activists morally justify any defense of the U.S. imperialist empire? The question begins with the premise that there are times when the U.S. empire must be defended by fighting necessary, quote-unquote, wars, and that peace activists actually have a duty to help shape policies to do so. I reject this notion for several reasons. The U.S. nation is an empire, and it's been so for more than a century. This nation, since its founding, has been based on violence and war. The very fact that this land constitutes now the U.S. was seized from indigenous peoples through violence and genocide. Millions of people from Africa were forcibly seized and brought here to increase the wealth of a small class of people. A large chunk of Mexico was forcibly taken by the U.S. in the 1800s. In the 1890s, the U.S. was no longer satisfied with the land in North America, and it seized Hawaii, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. In the 20th century, the U.S. Overthrew numerous governments throughout the world to enforce its imperialist rule. The U.S. fought 2 world wars and several regional wars to obtain and maintain hegemony. In the 21st century, the U.S. is now fighting large wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that we are very familiar with. And these shoes here represent maybe just one child, age 4, who was killed in Iraq. But there are millions of them in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's what it represents. U.S. hegemony, imperialist empire. The U.S. also uses forces to kill people in Pakistan, Somalia, Sudan, Colombia, and the Philippines, just to name a few countries where people have become victims of the U.S. war of terror. None of these wars and military actions, none of them were voted by the people of this country. Most were initiated by the President as Commander-in-Chief, and in some cases the Congress voted for war, and in all cases the Congress funded the wars. Both the White House and Congress represent a relatively small ruling class. The interests of this class were the reasons the U.S. went to war each and every time. The general public is fed propaganda, which is necessary to build a base of support for the wars, but has very little to do with reality. Neocon Paul Wolfowitz made clear that we are fed lies to justify wars when he admitted the WMDs became the public reason for the invasion of Iraq because that was the one reason members of the ruling class could agree to put out to the public. So the public bought this, hook, line, and sinker, just like they're buying in Afghanistan. We are trying to liberate women. This conference asks, who decides about war? Well, it is clear not the people, The people of the US do not decide about war. We can be damn sure the ruling class is not going to consult with the peace movement or peace activists. And we are delusional if we think we can rely on our elected representatives to represent our interests as long as we pressure them enough as regards to war. The majority of Americans now oppose the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do we see a rush by congressional representatives and senators to end the wars? Has Congress refused to vote to fund the wars? Has Obama ordered all the troops home? No, they haven't. And it is not because politicians do not know how to read polls. Instead, Obama has escalated the wars in Afghanistan and now into Pakistan. He has continued the war in Iraq. He is keeping all options on the table in regard to Iran. Let's look at the elections. In 2000.